Alright, I've got a little project for you here today. We're going to be replacing the rear inner CV boot on my 2003 Polaris Sportsman 500. Now keep in mind that the process we go through here today is going to be the same or similar on a lot of other ATVs. And also the job is very much the same as replacing the entire shaft. So if your four-wheeler, ATV, UTV, whatever, has a lot of miles on it and you've never replaced the CV shaft and you're going to do this job, you might consider just buying the whole shaft with the boots and replacing just the entire assembly. It's basically the same amount of work, okay? But I have a couple of these on hand because this thing seems to chew through CV boots. I'm not sure if it's the four-wheeler or if it's the driver, but anyways, I had this on hand and we're going to change it out today. Alright, let's get started. Alright, you can see we have Connor and Keith hanging out with us today. They're helping us out, at least while the garage is cool. Okay, I've got the four-wheeler up off the ground, I've got it supported by a jack, and I've also got the weight hanging from this come-along here. I like to do that because when you start working on these ATVs, they're so light they'll sometimes just slide right off the jack, okay? And you can see the tear right there in the boot. So you always want to inspect your CV boots and look for grease, okay? Telltale sign. This side's got the brake, so what we may try to do is leave that on because we're going to tip this carrier out of the way, but there may not be enough slack in the line, so we may have to pull this caliper off. Not a big deal, just 2 bolts. We're going to start by removing the axle nut under this little cover here, and I'm going to get a tripod before we get started. And now we have a cotter pin we need to remove. And we'll try to save it, but if not, we'll just replace it. Alright, this nut is 1 1/8 and I'm going to use my battery-powered impact, or at least give it a try here. If you're using an impact or if you're using a wrench, doesn't really matter. You may want to use a screwdriver and awl, put it through one of the cooling holes on your rotor, and that'll help prevent that from spinning as you break this loose. Just like that. The dogs didn't like it, but okay, keep track of your washers. You'll want to make sure that you reinstall them on reassembly. Alright, next we have this bolt here, okay? The bolt head and the nut are both 9/16. Alright, before I tap that out, I'm actually going to get a block of wood and we're going to tap on the axle a little bit just so we can see if we can break it free or break it loose from this hub assembly before we actually loosen this all up. I can actually see it moving, so it has broken free. You could also use a little bit of penetrating fluid or something in there to break it loose if you wanted to. It's not going to push in too awful far because the shaft is in behind that, okay? Now we can tap that bolt out that we just removed the nuts from. And we'll just use that same block of wood so we don't damage any threads. Alright, so it's broken free. One problem is I think this caliper is preventing the hub assembly, as I suspected, from moving far enough. I could probably fight it out of there, especially if I loosen this up, which I like to do because get this out of the way. But I think just so I'm not fighting with it on reassembly, also I'm going to remove the caliper, which is this bolt here, and I believe those are 1/2 inch. Let me check. Just to give us a little bit more play or movement on the hub carrier assembly. 2 bolts, 1/2 inch. And it looks like I could definitely use some brake pads. So I'll be doing a video on rear brake pads soon. Alright, there we go. Alright, so 9/16 here. Keep track of your bushings. Okay, that gives us more room, just kind of lifting that up out of the way. I mean, I could remove this if I wanted to get it up even higher. I think that's probably fine. Alright, so at this point we have a couple of choices, and I've done a video on replacing the boot in the wheeler, and I've also done a video on replacing the shaft. And what I could tell you is, it's going to be easier to replace this boot with the shaft out of the wheeler. So for this video, I'm going to replace the entire. I'm going to pull the entire shaft, and we'll replace the boot out on a bench. Okay, it's just easier to get the tool in, the band tool. Okay, so let's go ahead and what we're going to do is you're going to grab the CV shaft and you're going to give it a hard yank. Now, one problem is I've got the wheeler kind of floating and hanging, so I'm going to be basically pushing with one hand, and I'm going to give it a quick jerk with the other. All right. And just like that. Alright, so I have the CV shaft out, and it's just, I've cleaned it up a little bit, not a whole lot. So what I want to do is I want to show you how to remove these OEM bands. Now, your new CV boot's likely going to have new bands, and there are a couple of different styles, and I've done videos on each of them. But these OEM bands, you can actually reuse them. If you see right here, there's a raised section here, and then on the inner band, where it overlaps, there's another raised section. If we just pinch those, it should compress the band enough to release these hooks here at the end. Okay, so I'm going to try to get it on camera as much as possible. Okay, hopefully you saw it. This band has been released and it can be reused. Now, I don't know if we want to reuse it, but it's perfectly fine to. Nothing was damaged in that process. Okay, so basically, this just sits like this. Okay, and what that little pinch does is it allows it to just compress enough to release. Okay, let's try it on the inner band here. Okay, so you're looking for the raised section. Those are the hooks. You probably couldn't see any of that because my hand was in the way, but just like that. Alright, so we actually have to separate the shaft from the CV joint, and it's going to be just easier to clean this all up so I can show you kind of what that entails. So I'm going to go ahead and clean that up. Alright, this is the only part that's probably going to be more difficult out of the vehicle than in the vehicle. That's because we're going to have to try to hold on to this CV joint while we pull the shaft. But before we do that, I want to show you, if I can, this little opening here. You should be able to find sort of the ears of a circlip. Okay, and this is a little different situation because normally what you do is you compress those circlips like you would squeeze them together. But on this assembly, on this Polaris, and others I'm sure, we're going to expand the circlip. So I don't know if you can actually see it or not because of the grease. But basically you could take some fine needle nose pliers and kind of put it in like that and then expand. Okay. Now the problem is where I have the camera and all of that, I can't actually pull it. The other way you can do it is take two sets of pliers and kind of squeeze this way and squeeze that way. But I've been successful using one set of pliers, expanding, and then pulling the shaft. Okay, so let me move the camera, and I'm going to try to get that done. I may or may not be able to get that on camera for you. Alright, hopefully I got that on camera. I ended up clamping the joint, and then used the ridge of this board to hold it from sliding forward. Alright, now I'm just going to take a rag and spend some time cleaning this up. Okay, let me get this finished up. We'll get as much of this existing grease out as possible because obviously the CV boot comes with a new bag of grease. Alright, so we'll stick the boot on here. Incidentally, CV stands for constant velocity, so it's a constant velocity joint, and they're actually pretty cool. I've taken one apart and cleaned it up and kind of checked out how it works. Alright, just going to try to center the circlip a little bit. Okay, now here's the thing. One of the times I did this job might have been my first time. I didn't have the shaft in all the way, so the circlip didn't set. So now I'm in the habit of test it. Okay, what ended up happening was after riding for a while, it had pulled out. It mashed the spline on the end of the shaft, and rather than replace it, I actually cut each one with a Dremel and put it back in. Alright, so I think we're good. At this point, we just need to add the grease, slide the boot down, put the clamps on, get it installed. Alright, so we're just going to squeeze the entire contents of the bag down into the cup here. I know some people probably take these apart and clean all the grease out because there are differences in grease and sometimes they don't really get along, but I'm not going to do that, right? If I'm going to go through all that, I'm just going to buy a new shaft. I think a whole replacement CV shaft, and I'll link to some down below. I think they're maybe, last time I bought it, maybe 80, 89, 90 bucks, something like that. Say around 100. All right, just give you a close-up of how this is going to work here, okay? This part goes underneath. Basically, we're going to squeeze these parts together right here, just like we did when we removed it, and that's going to allow these hooks, and we might want to push down on this end once we get it squeezed, and then once we release it, it's going to be locked into place. Okay. Grab the pliers here. I don't know if you saw it, but hopefully you heard it. It's done. Okay. So basically squeezing those together allows you to compress it enough, push this down, release it, and it's locked in. Alright. Inner one. Okay, just like that. Okay, so you can, see if they're tight, try to move them. Okay, let's go get this thing installed. Alright, just to give you a shot here. This little circlip needs to compress and snap into place. See, right in there. Alright. And this is why I like getting this up out of the way so you have more of a straight on shot. If this was down here, I think it makes it more difficult, but I think the manual mentions just leaving that in place. Alright, so that's in, but I'm going to test it by pulling, okay? I'm pulling on the actual CV cup, or the CV joint cup, and that's in there. It's moving the four-wheeler, okay? Alright, so I've got the hub on here, and I've got the axle pulled through, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a castle nut and wind it on a couple of threads, just so while we're working with it, we don't lose that shaft back into the hub. It's kind of a pain to get the splines lined up and pull forward. Now, I will just say that the last couple times, or every time I've done this, I always pull these two bolts here, but the manual says nothing about that, so I was following the manual here today, and I think it's easier when you pull this whole hub right off, but that's me. So use your own discretion on that. We're going to move this thing back up here. Let me reposition the camera. And there is a bushing that goes underneath. I don't know if you saw it drop out on removal. There's a washer and a bushing. Make sure you're paying attention to the orientation. You can kind of see where this sets up into. There's a slot up here. Okay. Same thing here. Pay attention to the orientation of the bushings. You can get it tightened down and adjust it afterwards too. And oddly, I don't have any washers for this one, which I think is odd. Seems like there should be. It does have a locking nut. Alright, we need to install our brake caliper, even though we'll be pulling this off again. I don't know if you got a shot of that, but there's no pad at all on one of those. A couple of years ago, someone was actually riding this, and they were riding their foot on the pedal, the brake, the rear brake. They didn't realize, so that's probably what happened there. I don't think I'll need to compress this little caliper. But maybe. There we go. And remember, those were small bolts here. I believe they were 1/2 inch. Let me reposition the camera. Get these wound in here, and we'll torque down the hub nut, and we'll call this one done. Alright, so I just flipped to the torque spec in the manual, 100 foot-pounds here on this axle nut. So we're going to get this tightened down and cotter pin put back in, put the wheel on, take it for a little test drive. We'll call this one done until we get brake pads. So hey, thanks for watching. Hopefully this video has been helpful. If it has been helpful, please give me that thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you're not a subscriber. And leave questions and comments below. And be kind to one another. Alright? Have a great day. Take care.